The Witcher 3 is a hell of a game. In fact, it's one of the greatest games of all time. It's a giant of the RPG genre, and a blueprint for how to tell an engaging, excellently written story with meaningful player choices in a vast open-world setting. But even The Witcher 3 isn't perfect. No game is, and most likely no game ever will be. And here, in this feature, we'll be talking about a few things in CD Projekt Red's masterpiece that don't work as well as they should. Combat. Combat is perhaps one of The Witcher 3's most maligned aspects. At the end of the day, it boils down to button mashing, punctuated by some parries and blocks. And though there are a few boss fights here and there, especially in Blood and Wine, that do require some skill, fights in the game are usually too easy to just steamroll through. What's worse is the game doesn't make much use of some of its most interesting systems. Brewing potions and oils and using that to your advantage is how a Witcher should ideally operate. But given how easy the combat is more often than not, that stuff just gets left by the wayside, especially when you're not playing on hard. ROACH. It's hard to think of a game with horse riding as annoying as The Witcher 3, which is weird given how often games feature horse riding. You'd think most would know how to execute it well. And yet, in The Witcher 3, horse riding can be a frustrating experience. ROACH isn't the most responsive horse, to say the least, and is all too happy to run into trees or somehow find himself on top of buildings. Meanwhile, horseback combat is just as bad, if not worse, because it combines the worst tendencies of both combat and horse riding in the game. Slow start. The Witcher 3 tells a captivating and expansive story, bringing Geralt all over the continent and getting him involved in a variety of brewing conflicts, from the family issues of Velen's Bloody Baron to Novigrad's criminal underworld to the Jarls of Skellige to, of course, the Wild Hunt itself. It's intense and constantly exciting. Well, not constantly, maybe, because it doesn't exactly begin that way. The first few hours of the game has often been called a bit too slow, and it's hard to disagree with that. It's not until Geralt meets the likes of the Bloody Baron and Keira Metz that the game begins gathering pace. In light of how good the rest of the entire experience is, though, a slow start is quite easy to forgive. Input lag. The most fundamental thing that every game needs to do, regardless of genre or style, is be responsive to player inputs, because that is, after all, the be-all and end-all of how players interact with the game. The Witcher 3 often falters in this area. Similar to the likes of, say, Red Dead Redemption 2, input lag is quite frequent in The Witcher 3, which means Geralt often ends up feeling too slow and weighty. It's a feeling that pervades the entire experience, and stands as one of the game's biggest issues. Too much loot. Given that this is an RPG, it goes without saying that The Witcher 3 is a very loot-centric game. And though finding new weapons or armor or mutagens to make use of is certainly satisfying, the game goes perhaps a bit too far with its loot, because there's so much of it. In sacks, in chests, in small lockboxes, lying around haphazardly, everywhere you look, there's loot everywhere. But that's not the worst part. It feels like more than half of that loot is junk. Finding repair kits and cool swords is great, but what the hell are we going to do with spoons or ladles or frying pans? UI. In an RPG as vast and with as many systems as The Witcher 3, the user interface can be very important, but CDPR's open world epic doesn't always know how to present all of its information neatly and clearly. The UI is more often than not messy and cluttered, and navigating it can be an exercise in patience. Spending too much time in menus just figuring out what's where isn't necessarily the most fun. Long load times. Surprisingly enough, loading times in The Witcher 3 on the Switch aren't that bad, but when it comes to the PS4 and the Xbox One, they're a lot longer. Fast traveling is usually accompanied by load screens that can stretch far too long. Sure, this is something that saw significant improvements after several post-launch patches, so load times in The Witcher 3 now aren't nearly as bad as they were at launch, but they're still far from perfect. Glitches. Just like load times, glitches and technical issues in The Witcher 3 aren't nearly as pervasive as they used to be back when the game first launched, thanks to various post-launch patches. But there's still more than enough of them. Whether it's the common ones like texture pop-ins or glitched voice lines, or the rarer, more egregious ones like quests failing to load, glitches in The Witcher 3 are still quite common. To be fair, given how massive this game is, glitches are to be expected, so as annoying as they might be, they're at least a little easy to forgive. In most cases. Unbalanced XP curve. This is something that's more relevant to late and to end game activities than anything else, owing to the way the game balances progression. As you level up, you find that older, lower level quests end up giving very little XP points. And while that is understandable, given that the game doesn't want you to grind out all the quests and break its balance by becoming too overleveled, when you're in the late game and looking for stuff to do and get rewarded like 10 XP points for an entire quest, it can feel very unrewarding and like a waste of your time. Overused Witcher vision. The Witcher 3 is far from the only game guilty of this sin. From the Arkham games to Horizon Zero Dawn, we see this quite a lot in games, and The Witcher 3 suffers from these issues as well. It relies on Witcher vision far too much, to the extent that more than half the quests, at least on some level, boil down to Geralt using his Witcher vision and just following whatever trail that presents itself. It quickly gets repetitive and boring, especially given how long this game is. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from Gaming Bolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.